Beyond the gates, spoilers reveal that there are returns that feel like healing, and then there are returns that feel like punishment. Donnell's arrival did not come with the warmth of a son finally finding his way back home, nor with the relief of a family ready to repair what had been broken by time, absence, and grief. It came like a shadow crossing the threshold of a house already burdened with too much history, too much pride, and too many lies that had been kept alive simply because no one had the courage to bury them properly. In Fairmont Crest, people had always known how to dress pain in elegance. They knew how to stand in polished rooms, speak in measured voices, and pretend that family wounds were no more than temporary misunderstandings. But Donnell's return disturbed that carefully maintained illusion from the moment he reappeared, because he did not come back carrying nostalgia. He came back carrying memory, resentment, and something even more dangerous than anger, the need to understand why so much had been hidden from him, and why the people who were supposed to love him most had made silence into a family tradition. Vanessa felt the damage first, because a mother always recognizes when a child is no longer coming home to be loved, but to investigate. She saw it in Donnell's eyes, in the way he studied every room as if it had witnessed a crime, in the way he listened more than he spoke, in the way he seemed less interested in reconnecting than in measuring the distance between what he had been told and what he now suspected was true. For Vanessa, the pain was immediate and humiliating. She had spent so much time convincing herself that distance had protected him, that whatever secrets had poisoned her marriage to Douglas had at least spared her son from direct contamination. But the moment he stood before her again, older, colder, and disturbingly controlled, she understood that absence had not saved him at all. It had merely allowed his suspicions to harden in private, where no one could soften them with explanation. Douglas, meanwhile, reacted differently, though no less intensely. His first instinct was not grief or even guilt, but resistance. He was the kind of man who had survived by treating emotion like an enemy and vulnerability like weakness, and Donnell's return threatened to expose both. The problem was not simply that his son had come back changed. The real danger was that Donnell had come back observant, and observant people were always fatal in families built on omissions. Douglas had spent years believing that what remained unspoken could remain harmless. He had made decisions in the name of protection, pride, and legacy, but every one of those decisions had demanded sacrifice from someone else. Vanessa had sacrificed peace. Donnell had sacrificed trust. And now the balance that once seemed so carefully managed was beginning to collapse. The son standing before him was not merely asking where he belonged. He was asking what had been done in his name, what had been hidden beneath the polished surface of the McBride family, and why every explanation he had ever received now felt thin, rehearsed, and strategically incomplete. That question alone was enough to turn Douglas defensive, because men who build their authority on control rarely survive being asked to tell the whole truth. What made Donnell so disturbing to them was not loud rage, but disciplined rage. He did not explode on arrival. He did not accuse wildly or demand immediate confession. Instead, he moved through the family like someone mapping a battlefield, gathering fragments, noticing tension, remembering details that had once seemed meaningless. He carried with him old impressions that had never fully settled, the strange silences after certain phone calls, the way Vanessa used to stiffen whenever Douglas mentioned the past, the way his own childhood had always seemed shaped by invisible rules no one explained. Back then, he had accepted it because children often mistake secrecy for adulthood. But now, with distance and pain sharpening his instincts, he could see that secrecy had not protected the family. It had deformed it. The longer he stayed, the more he began to sense that his return was stirring up not one old wound, but several, and that the true horror was not that the family had suffered, but that it had adapted to suffering so well it no longer recognized itself as broken. That realization transformed his anger into obsession. He no longer wanted simple reconciliation. He wanted the truth in its ugliest form, even if it meant destroying the last fragile bond tying him to home. Vanessa was trapped in the cruelest position of all because she understood enough to be afraid, but not enough to feel innocent. She loved Donnell with the desperate, wounded love of a mother who knows she failed even if she cannot bear to say how. Her memories of Douglas were tangled in humiliation, loyalty, dependency, and old tenderness that had curdled into bitterness. There had been things she chose not to confront because confrontation would have required action, and action would have demanded that she shatter the structure of her own life. So she had remained still while rot spread beneath the floorboards. Now Donnell's return made that stillness impossible. Every glance from him felt like judgment. Every unanswered question felt like evidence. She became increasingly erratic, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because the truth had become too large to release cleanly. She feared that one confession would lead to another, and another after that, until everything she had preserved would be exposed as cowardice masquerading as sacrifice. Her emotional deterioration deepened when she began to suspect that Donnell had not returned alone emotionally. He had returned with the weight of old records, partial stories, and perhaps even outside information that could connect the private tragedies of their home to decisions Douglas had long buried under legal papers, family mythology, and strategic silence. The more Vanessa sensed that a reckoning was coming, the more desperate she became to manage it, and desperation made her dangerous in ways even she did not anticipate. Donnell's internal conflict intensified because what he uncovered never arrived in a complete and satisfying form. Instead, it came in pieces that only made the emptiness larger. A document stored where it should not have been. A date that did not align with the story he had been told. A financial trail that hinted at protection payments, buried obligations, or hush arrangements disguised as family necessity. A moment of raw panic on Vanessa's face when he innocently raised a subject she thought had died years ago. These were not dramatic revelations on their own, but together they created something suffocating, the certainty that his life had been shaped by decisions made in secret by people who never trusted him with the truth. That certainty pushed him into a darker emotional space. He began to wonder whether he had ever truly been loved as himself, or whether he had merely been managed as part of a larger strategy to preserve the McBride name and the fragile illusion of control surrounding it. The pain of that suspicion was more corrosive than direct betrayal. Direct betrayal at least offers clarity. This was worse. This was the possibility that every tender memory had been contaminated from the beginning by calculation, fear, and selective truth. Douglas, pressed from both sides, responded as men like him often do when their authority begins to crumble. He tightened his grip until everything cracked. Instead of opening up, he became more controlling. He questioned Donnell's motives, treated his return like an attack, and interpreted every act of curiosity as disloyalty. He tried to corner Vanessa into discipline, insisting that emotional weakness was making the situation worse, but what he called weakness was actually her conscience breaking through years of suppression. The household turned poisonous. Old resentments surfaced with terrifying speed. Vanessa began to lash out in private ways, sabotaging Douglas's attempts to contain the truth, refusing his narrative even when she lacked the courage to fully oppose him. Donnell, seeing both of them fracture under pressure, became even more convinced that whatever had been hidden must be monstrous. That belief fed his recklessness. He pushed harder, ignored warnings, and entered emotional territory from which there was no peaceful retreat. The search for truth ceased to be noble and became vindictive. He no longer wanted answers simply to heal. He wanted exposure, consequences, collapse. That shift was the real tragedy of his return. Donnell had come back wounded, but he might still have been salvageable if met with honesty. Instead, the resistance he encountered transformed pain into aggression. Vanessa watched it happen in horror. She could see her son becoming harder, more volatile, more willing to injure in order to force revelation. And because guilt had already hollowed her out, she began to spiral into self-destructive thinking. She told herself that perhaps she deserved to lose him. Perhaps losing him was the final price for every year she had chosen comfort over courage. Yet even in that self-punishment, she remained divided. One part of her wanted to finally tell everything, to tear the family open and let the truth bleed out. Another part still feared what would happen if Donnell learned not just that he had been lied to, but exactly why. She feared that some truths do not restore identity, they annihilate it. If Donnell discovered that his past had been manipulated not just to protect him, but to preserve people unworthy of that protection, then whatever remained of family might not survive. The deeper emotional torment came from the fact that Donnell's return awakened grief that had never been properly mourned. The family had not merely hidden facts, they had buried emotional reality. They had refused to acknowledge the cost of every silence, every compromise, every decision made for the sake of keeping appearances intact. So when Donnell began forcing open those sealed spaces, what emerged was not only scandal, but accumulated sorrow. Vanessa was forced to confront the years she lost to fear. Douglas was forced to confront the possibility that strength without honesty is just another form of decay. Donnell was forced to confront the unbearable truth that the home he had spent years missing may never have truly existed, at least not in the form he remembered. That realization hit him with the force of bereavement. He was not simply uncovering secrets. He was mourning an entire version of his life. And that is why his return became so haunting. It was never just about a son coming back with questions. It was about a family being dragged to the edge of its own mythology and forced to look down. Vanessa and Douglas had spent too long believing that what they concealed would stay contained, that love could survive distortion, that protection and deception were close enough to be mistaken for one another. Donnell shattered that illusion simply by returning with memory sharpened into purpose. What he brought back with him was not peace, not reunion, not closure, but a storm of unfinished grief and long-delayed consequences. In that storm, every expression of love became suspect. Every act of silence looked like betrayal, and every difficult decision turned cruel once exposed to light. By the time the truth began to surface in full, no one involved could claim innocence anymore. Vanessa had allowed too much. Douglas had controlled too much. Donnell had begun to destroy too much. Each of them had become both victim and threat within the same collapsing family structure. And that is what made the story unbearable in the most compelling way. The return was not the beginning of healing, but the moment the house of memory finally cracked open and revealed that beneath all its elegance, it had been built on fear, grief, and damage all along.